And now, for our last speaker of the day, who has the unenviable situation of following Chuck Baldwin. But I'm sure he's up to the task. Representative Matt Shea from Washington is in second term as legislator in this House of Representatives in Washington. He's a leader there of the 10th Amendment movement who wants to make sure, and is making sure, that they understand that what the 10th Amendment is about and the rights it preserves to the states and to the people. He's an attorney and his private joke. Anyway, no, he practices law to make a living, I suppose, as well as being a state legislator. He's a homeschooling parent. There's a few of us had lunch with him on Thursday of this week and learned to know him, and you're going to enjoy this. He's a great representative, a great patriot, and one who his only shortcoming is that he's not yet joined the Constitution Party. Welcome, Matt Shea.
So are we on? Excellent. Well, anytime I tell people I'm an attorney, I kind of feel like Balaam's ass, actually. So try to keep that to myself. Well, a full 73% of Americans believe that we are headed in the wrong direction off a cliff. But there's some good news in that, and the good news is that the traffic is so bad and the gas prices are so high, we probably aren't going to get there, right? Well, before I start tonight, I want to say, and I start all my speeches this way, our hope is not in man, our hope is in Jesus Christ. Amen? Amen. All right. It's great to be, and I'm going to read this a little bit, but it's great to be with all you Tea Party, pro-life, 10th, or gun-toting, homeschooling, global warming, denying, Austrian school, returning, veteran, Constitution Party, freedom-loving radicals this afternoon. Amen? I think that covers their list, doesn't it? I want to start by saying thank you to all the veterans in the room this afternoon. I'm a veteran myself, 10 years in the Army, 2 combat tours overseas in Bosnia and Iraq, and it really is, we're moving from one battlefield to another, aren't we? So if you're a veteran, raise your hand, let's give you a round of applause, all right? Now, I'm going to go off teleprompter now, but I want to talk to you about a couple things to start, and the first is foreign policy. Foreign policy and social policy really are the difference, I think, between freedom-loving people and what we have in Washington, D.C. and Olympia. Both parties. It should be very simple to articulate a foreign policy where we say that, spreading the message of freedom around the world is better done by our businesses and our missionaries than it is by the barrel of a gun. Right? But we should let the message go forward to every country and every people in the world that we are willing to do everything we can to live in peace. But if you touch one American anywhere in the world, you will pay a terrible price. But we will follow the Constitution. We will declare war on you, or we'll issue a letter of marque and reprisal to take you out. Then I want to talk about social policy. I hear so often, Matt, you can't talk about social issues. You can't talk about those things. And I say, the problem is that social policies have economic consequences. If you're a fiscal conservative, you have to believe that. This country would be a different place today if we had 53 million babies that were now productive members of the workforce instead of being aborted and thrown in a trash can. Told you I was off script. And I want to address something else. In the 10th Amendment movement, I hear all the time, I heard it from our Attorney General, who's now running for governor in the state of Washington, that, well, there's that supremacy clause thing, Matt, and anything Congress passes is the supreme law of the land. And I say very simply, it's only the supreme law of the land if it's constitutional, right? And then they say, oh, well, man, I think you got a point there. You know that, but the Supreme Court, that's the final arbiter of what's constitutional in this country. And I simply say to them, really, well, doesn't the Constitution require even state legislators to take an oath to protect and defend it? And that this issue was settled at the end of World War II. And then they kind of look at me strange. What do you mean it was settled at the end of World War II, Matt? Well, Befehl ist Befehl, an order is an order, is not an excuse to subjugate and kill people. And ultimately, that's where this policy in Washington, D.C. is going. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if he was standing here today, would say exactly the same thing and would say exactly the same things that Pastor Chuck has been saying. An order is not an excuse. We have a duty not to comply with unconstitutional laws. So now is the time. Now is the time. We have the opportunity of a generation to restore freedom in a God-honoring constitutional republic, and we can't squander it. We can't. But I believe that to have a rebirth of freedom in this country, we must have a rebirth of courage. You know, I know it's a scary thought, but I kind of want you to imagine the conversations they're having in the White House right now. Okay? Those evil Constitution Party members, you know, they believe in freedom and they believe in restoring a God-honoring constitutional republic, and some of them have actually read the Constitution. Some of them even have guns in their homes. You know, earlier this year, the Southern Poverty Law Center came to Spokane, Washington, and I happened to be on their list of the top 10 most dangerous legislators in the country. So we'll go for number one this next year. So no joke, I got an invitation. So I decided to show up. And, you know your enemy, right? I decided to show up. And during this presentation, it was going along okay. You know, they were talking about the criminal networks and some of this is some organizations in the United States. But all of a sudden, then they switched. It was very subtle. They said, I want to switch to something else. The groups that are responsible for the most officer-involved shootings in the United States of America are patriot groups. And we want to name some of those patriot groups. And you know who was number one on the list? The Constitution Party. And the John Birch Society was number 2. We the People was number 3. The National Association of Rural Landowners was number 4, which that one I still don't even get, you know. But afterwards, they continued. They didn't let that go. They talked about some pretty scary things and admitted it. Now, this is a room full of law enforcement officers. There's about 100 people in the room. There were law enforcement officers, FBI agents, park rangers. I mean, it ran the gamut. And they told these officers, you know, when these groups meet, that you should make arrangements to search the trash after their meetings and get their literature. And I kind of shocked at that. Then they went further. If you need aerial surveillance of these groups' compounds, we'd be happy to provide it. And then they went on to show a video of aerial surveillance of private property inside the United States of America. That should stun everybody in this room. So afterwards, and I'm not going to tell you who, but afterwards, this all got leaked out to some folks in Spokane, and our sheriff kind of got called on the carpet about it. And to his credit, he said the Southern Poverty Law Center will never come to Spokane County to train again. So. But if we hadn't been vigilant, that would have happened and no one would have ever known. And their comment that if you are for small government, and in their eyes, apparently that's a bad thing, if you're small government and Christian, you move up a couple notches on our list, would have never been made public. But the fact they have a list, is a problem. And what have we come to in this country where if you take a patriotic stand, that you're now vilified? I mean, where have we come? And I know what the answer to that is. I think it's very simple. No more Southern Poverty Law Center, no more D.C. Democrats, no more establishment Republicans. Instead, we need statesmen. And I don't care what letter you put after your name. We need statesmen who will stand for freedom in the Constitution in this country. So I want to start with a couple people, and the first is with President Obama and his friend Jimmy Hoffa. The AFL-CIO may be Obama's army, but this is the people's army, and they need to know that we will march for freedom, we will stand for freedom anywhere, any place, any time, because we want to see our kids and our grandkids live free. And a short message to President Obama might be this, because I really think he needs to hear it. Instead of worrying about getting reelected, how about we get somebody that will care about what's best for the people and the restoration of a God-honoring constitutional republic in the president's office? How about that for a change? Because I don't want somebody who will treat the Constitution as irrelevant. You saw that in Time magazine, July 4th. That's no coincidence. They know what they're doing. I would say if I had the chance to President Obama, Mr. President, that the Constitution isn't some meaningless piece of paper. It was bought and paid for by the blood and sweat of our veterans and by the lives of our many dead patriots, and don't you dare dishonor their memory. And I've stood on 2 battlefields across the world, and I did so because I believe, and I'm here today because I believe their sacrifices mean something, because I believe our Constitution means something, and because I believe that freedom's worth fighting for. My question to you is, do you believe that? Yes. So if so, will you fight for the Constitution? Yes. Okay, will you fight for lower taxes? Yes. Will you fight for less government? Yes. Will you fight for the right to keep and bear arms? Yes. Then let's stand together. Let's resolve today that we stand together, state by state, county by county, neighborhood by neighborhood, church by church, business by business, family by family, and draw a line in the sand and say, enough is enough, you can go no further. I'm probably going to lose some friends today over what I'm going to say here in a little bit. But as I got a text before I came here, and the person said, well, if you're going to lose some friends, it's good to sort that out now. And you're liable to gain some. With a great calling, as Pastor Chuck and many of you have sacrificed, with a great calling comes great suffering. And we tend not to talk about that as Christians, but if we're afraid of confrontation, we're guilty of dishonoring our oaths, and I think of turning our backs on God, our country, and our family. And I'm more afraid of God than I am of the Democrat Party or the establishment Republicans who will run somebody against me in the primary. So let me talk to you today about what I think that message should be. I think it should be very simple. So I would tell President Obama, establishment Republicans, let us be clear. This is the Obama Great Depression that is destroying our country. This is the Democrat Party that is unashamedly trying to bring socialism to this country. That it is establishment and globalist rhinos in my own party who are going to cut taxes while massively increasing spending and taking our liberties away with the Patriot Act. It's bureaucrats backed by those unscrupulous politicians who are intruding into and, in fact, trying to control every aspect of our daily lives. And it's the banksters at the Federal Reserve printing money who seek to shackle our children and our grandchildren with slavery. That's a simple message. But all of this isn't new. And I want to tell you about Kharkov, Ukraine. I was there in August. My wife is Ukrainian, and a lot of those folks fled here to the United States because this is where freedom was. Because they didn't have to worry about holding church services in the wood like my wife did when she was 6 years old. They didn't have to worry about their family members here in the United States being thrown in prison like my father-in-law was for 14 days and tortured by the KGB. They didn't have to worry about that. And when I was over there, they were celebrating their 20th anniversary, and I was meeting with family, and I learned a little bit about our family history, and I want to paint for you right now a very disturbing picture of how Stalin came to power, because I didn't really understand it. And it was very, very insidious, but you're going to see some parallels here that should frighten you a little bit, and they rightfully should. My father-in-law was just a young boy in 1928 when the Red Terror began, and they came to Kharkov, Ukraine, and you know what the first thing they did was? They went around and they killed all of the community leaders, all the small business owners, and all the people they thought were going to cause trouble. But that didn't work. So they came back in 1930, and they went after the church, and they burned the Orthodox cathedral in Kharkov to the ground. But that didn't work. So they came back in 1932 and 33, and they took all the food. Now, give you an idea about Ukraine, it's the breadbasket of Europe. Their soil is a thick, black, rich soil. And the Germans, when they came later, loved that soil so much they literally took it off the top and loaded it onto trains and sent it back to Germany. A lot of people don't know that. But 1932, 1933, they tried to starve the Ukrainian people out, killed millions of people. To this day, I didn't see any wildlife other than cats and rabbits in the woods. They killed millions of people. And during that time, Stalin, as an excuse, used the following, that these were kulaks. These were the productive members of society that were taking away the workers' money and impoverishing the workers. And the definition that he used of a kulak was very interesting. Anybody that owned something outside of their home, anybody who used hired labor, and he painted them as greedy, selfish thieves that weren't paying their fair share, that the money was being made on the backs of others, and that those radicals were responsible for the economic woes of the Soviet Union. Does that sound familiar? You know, first and foremost, I think we need to understand and embrace the admonishment of Edmund Burke, who said that there is no safety for honest men except by believing all possible evil of evil men. And we as Christians don't think that people are capable of those things. You know what they are, and we have to understand that. I think it's the very first thing we have to grasp. And I think the second thing is, don't be deceived. These people aren't stupid, they're brilliant. These people are absolutely brilliant, but their foundation is sand. And while they may be driving this intentional plan forward, their foundation is sand. And I think that we need to just tell them very bluntly in public, you will not succeed. That we will speak boldly, we will confront our neighbors, we will run for every level of office, whether it's cemetery, commission, or higher. And I got a story about that. Well, as a side note, we ran somebody for cemetery commissioner in Spokane. Lady went out and doorbelled and beat a longtime incumbent, and apparently you have those even in cemetery commissions. A longtime incumbent with 60% of the vote. And you know what? She ended up at the very second meeting, being the deciding vote to block a tax increase in that cemetery district. That's what we have to do, is show up. They've been showing up and winning. We show up, they lose. If we show up, they will lose. Talking about confronting our neighbors. When our president says, since when is greed a virtue, we should be really quick with the comeback. Since when is forcibly redistributing wealth not a sin? When we hear socialists say that, we lovers of freedom don't love our neighbor, that we're content to watch them struggle and just not really care about the less fortunate, we respond very simply, charity is an individual decision, not a government one. When we hear the Washington State Patrol say to every gun dealer in the state of Washington this last year, we want your names, we want your addresses, we want your social security numbers, we want your telephone numbers, and we want the date of purchase of every AR-15 in the last 12 months, we need to simply say, you know what? Our guns are none of your business. Thank you very much. But we shouldn't stop we shouldn't stop there on the defense. We need to go on the offense. I'm a huge student of General Patton, and I believe he was the greatest general we've had outside of George Washington. He believed going on the attack. We need to go on the attack and start asking them questions. Is it loving our neighbor to nationalize health care, driving up taxes, destroying small business, and rationing care for everyone? Is that loving our neighbor? Or maybe it's loving our neighbor to nationalize our energy policy with cap and trade, close our coal plants, and impose drilling moratoriums to drive up energy costs and decrease productivity. Maybe that's loving our neighbor. Or maybe it's loving our neighbor to claim a need for gun control after selling our guns to gangsters in Mexico who are now killing our Border Patrol agents. Maybe that's loving our neighbor. Or maybe it's loving our neighbor to nationalize automakers, nationalize banks, conduct predatory audits on small businesses that object. Isn't that what Mussolini and Hitler did? We need to ask those questions. And I would say last, is it really loving our neighbor to continue printing Federal Reserve notes so we have inflation, completely impoverishing those on fixed incomes like our disabled veterans and our grandmothers? Is that loving our neighbor? Aren't those the tools of subjugation and intimidation? I mean, where's the hope in that? Where's the hope in that? When have we had enough? Our president has called us his enemies. He's told wounded veterans they can pay for themselves, that the Constitution Party members are teabaggers, un-American, and extremist. From his supporters, we're called derogatory and vile names on almost a daily basis. When have we had enough? Our president is openly hostile to Arizona, treating that state worse than he does North Korea. He's threatened to shut down air travel to Texas. Our small businesses are constantly audited by swarms of bureaucrats and crushed under the burden of constant inspections, fines, and paperwork. If you read the Declaration of Independence, you see one of the reasons we broke away from King George was he sent forth hither swarms of officers to eat out our substance. The laws and rules and regulations are also constantly changing on those small businesses. Everybody in this room, we don't even know what the law is most of the time. Even the attorneys don't. In fact, most businesses have to ask permission for a myriad of levels of government in order to just simply improve their shop or factory. In the Ukraine, if you want to start a business, you make the sausage in your backyard and you sell it down at the market. That's it. The only thing between you and the market's the road. I think we need to ask the question of ourselves, how long will we continue to beg like dogs only to be satisfied with a few scraps from the king's table? When have we had enough? When we have no guns? When there's an IRS agent stationed in every neighborhood in our country? When the piercing gaze of Big Sister penetrates our homes to tell us what we should eat, or maybe what we should drive, or how long we should keep our lights on? Is that not the very definition of slavery? Is it not the very definition of slavery? Some cry peace and safety and prosperity, but there is no peace when we've been at constant war for more than 10 years, is there? Is there any safety when we turn a blind eye to Muslim terrorists and the ambitions of China, only to focus on returning combat veterans as right-wing extremist terrorists? Is there any prosperity when hardworking Americans are rewarded with their labor with a pink slip and the merciless audit of a tax man and the constant changing scrutiny of unelected bureaucrats? Think about that. Our republic is dying. When have we had enough? When are we going to do something? When are we going to stand up? You've taken the first step coming here today. But this is our watch. This is our watch. for our generation. And we have to act now. And freedom without fighting is just an illusion. It's just an illusion. And again, in order to have a rebirth of freedom, I think we need to have a rebirth of courage. And granted, some of us have protested and faxed and emailed millions of letters and voted out the countless rhinos and progressives who are destroying our republic, but you know what? That's not enough. It's not enough. Each and every one of us in this room needs to run for elected office at the state and local level. Each and every one of us needs to fight Agenda 21 at the local level through coordination at every step, at every town hall meeting, at every time they call in for witnesses or testimony. We should show up and tell them not in our town, not in our county, not in our state. And we need to stand with those county sheriffs, as few as they may be. We need to stand with those county sheriffs who are going to stand between the federal government, the federal agents, and the people. We need to do that. We need to stand with state legislators who will nullify nationalized health care. We need to stand with state legislators that will nullify cap and trade. We need to stand with state legislators who will nullify grope and feel by the TSA. We need to stand with state legislators who will nullify the Federal Reserve by recognizing gold and silver as legal tender in every state throughout the Union. We need to stand with state legislators who will institute the Firearms Freedom Act to say to the federal government, if the firearm is made in the state of Washington or the state of Idaho or the state of Montana and stays in the state of Idaho, the state of Washington or the state of Montana, you have absolutely no jurisdiction over that firearm. And then we need to put some teeth in these bills. We need to say to our sheriffs, you have the power to stand between those federal agents and the people. And we need to say to the federal government that if you want your money, and a lot of you don't know this, we collect a lot of tax money for the federal government, like the gas tax. If you want your money, come get it. Come get it. Because if you take the money you try to dole out to the state away from us, you ain't getting yours either. And this is called a federal tax escrow account. We're just going to take the money we normally collect and write a check to the federal government for and put it in a separate account. And if they try to take money away for roads or whatever, they aren't getting their money. That's the teeth we need in this kind of legislation. You know, a lot of you understand that problems are dealt with best closest to home. And I think that's the genius of our republic. We have one large republic made up of several smaller republics, the state made up of even smaller republics, the counties. And ultimately, the federal government was supposed to deal with external threats. That's what the founding fathers believed. The states were supposed to deal with the internal problems. Simple. And I really believe that, like Chuck said, that this is coming crashing down. It's going to devolve locally. Everything will devolve locally. And those local positions will become all the more important. So that's why we need to run people for those positions now. That's why we need to do it now. I would say at the national level, what's the solution? Well, don't trust any politician that won't make freedom a reality. And I'm going to add something to that. I think the solution doesn't lie at the national level. I think it lies with each one of you. It lies with each one of you. I think we can change the direction of our country without changing the faces in Congress by doing it at the local level, by defending freedom locally. And Pastor Chuck, I hope I don't regret saying this, but hard times are coming, and I say let them come. I say let them come. Because I say, what's the alternative? Kneel down and accept the chains of socialist slavery? Instead, I think there's a tremendous opportunity here, because you know what's going to happen as the economy continues to decline and gas prices and food prices and electricity prices continue to rise. People are going to be looking for answers, and you know what? We have them. We have them, and we need to have the courage to tell them. We need to have the courage to tell them. And while it's a scary time and it's a frightening prospect to challenge our friends and our family and our co-workers, that's what courage is. It's continuing forward even in the face of fear. And anybody who's ever joined a battle knows that. It's not what you do joining the battle, it's what you do after you face that fear that counts. Do you turn? Do you run? Sit on your couch and watch TV? Or do you join? Do you run for elected office at the local level? What do you do? I believe America is still the greatest nation that has ever existed in the history of the world. And not for what a lot of people talk about. I think it's for our unshakable faith, at least in the remnant that is in this country, in God, and that Christian free men and free women in a republic is still the greatest government ever devised by man. And that we are known not for our economy, not for our political system, not for any of that, but what we have done to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the world. We have sent more missionaries and more money overseas to do that than any other country in the history of the world. So I want to conclude by just asking you if you will join me in promising what I'm about to promise you, that I will continue to fight tooth and nail for freedom to expand liberty and shrink government, and honor my oath to protect and defend the Constitution so that our kids and our grandkids may live in peace and prosperity and freedom. Now is the time for courage, and I want to thank all of you constitutionalists for joining me in this last great battle for freedom. And you know what their worst case scenario is? Is that there is a cohesive group of constitutionalists out there that'll challenge them. And I have never said this publicly before, but I admonish you and everyone listening to read a book called When the Almond Tree Blossoms. It was written in 1992 and is supposedly based off a Rand Corporation report about what the U.S. would look like in 20 years, 2012. It was endorsed on the back by Zbigniew Brzezinski as a worst-case scenario of what would happen in this country. And you know what their worst-case scenario was? That constitutionalists, and that's what they called them then, by the way, in this book, that constitutionalists in Washington and Idaho and Montana told them this far and no farther. May God bless you all. May He make this generation the greatest one. Thank you.